Yesterday, my son demanded $1 million. I laughed and asked anything else. The silence that followed was colder than any winter morning I had endured in all my 72 years. Today, I am going to tell you something I never thought I would share. Before we begin, I would be truly grateful if you would take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep sharing these stories with those who need them most. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and I live in a modest brownstone apartment in Brooklyn, New York. The morning Ethan sent that email, I was standing in my kitchen, wearing the same faded floral robe I had worn for the past decade. My fingers trembled as I held my phone reading his message for the third time. The words were clinical, businesslike, as though he were requesting a loan from a bank rather than from his mother. "I need $1 million by the end of the month, Mom. I know you have it. This is important." The casual assumption that I would simply comply made my stomach turn. I set the phone down on the counter next to the ceramic sugar bowl my late husband Thomas had given me on our 20th anniversary. The bowl was chipped now, like everything else in this apartment, like everything else in my life. The sugar bowl was pale blue with delicate white flowers painted along its rim. Thomas had found it at an antique shop in the village during one of our weekend walks. He knew I collected ceramics, or at least I used to before the children were born, before their needs eclipsed everything else. I remember how his eyes had lit up when he showed it to me. "Eleanor," he had said, his voice soft with excitement. "Look at this. It made me think of you." That bowl had survived 2 decades of family life, but the chip on its lip had appeared 3 years ago, when Ethan had slammed his fist on the counter during an argument about money. He had wanted $50,000 to invest in a cryptocurrency scheme. When I hesitated, he exploded. The bowl had toppled off its shelf and cracked against the tile floor. Ethan had not even noticed. He had stormed out, leaving me to sweep up the pieces of my anniversary gift and my illusions about my son. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Yellow cabs honked their way through the morning traffic. A young mother pushed a stroller past the bodega on the corner. The city hummed with life while I stood frozen in the realization that my son saw me not as a person, but as an ATM machine. I thought about the last time I had seen Ethan in person. It had been 8 months ago at a restaurant in Manhattan where he arrived 40 minutes late. He had ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, barely looked at me while he ate, and left immediately after dessert, claiming he had an important meeting. I paid the bill as always. I always paid. That dinner had been my attempt to reconnect with him. I had planned it for weeks, researching restaurants, choosing one I thought he would like, making the reservation at a time I hoped would work with his schedule. I had even bought a new dress for the occasion, a soft gray wool that the saleswoman assured me was flattering. When he finally arrived, I stood to greet him, expecting at least a hug. Instead, he gave me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek and immediately pulled out his phone. "Sorry, Mom," he said, not looking at me. "Just need to finish this email." 10 minutes passed before he put the phone away. By then, the bread basket was empty, and I had drunk half my water glass just to have something to do with my hands. The apartment around me told the story of a woman who had given everything. Family photos lined the mantel, but if you looked closely, you would notice something strange. In every picture, I was slightly blurred or cut off at the edge. In the Christmas photo from 2 years ago, only half my face was visible. In the summer barbecue photo, I was standing in the background while my children posed in the center. Even in my own home, I had become peripheral. I kept these photos displayed because I wanted to believe they represented something real. I wanted to believe that the smiling faces belonged to people who loved me. There was one photo that particularly haunted me. It was from Jessica's college graduation 5 years ago. She stood in her cap and gown, flanked by her father on one side and her best friend on the other. I had been the one taking the picture. Always behind the camera, never in the frame. After the ceremony, when I suggested we take one with me in it, Jessica had sighed. "Mom, we already have enough photos. Can we just go to lunch? I am starving." I had put the camera away and never brought it up again. The image of her graduation sat on my mantel, a permanent reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the small wooden table where I had fed my children breakfast for years. I remembered Ethan at 7 years old, his face covered in syrup, laughing as he told me about a dream where he could fly. I remembered Jessica at 9 practicing her piano recital piece over and over until she got it perfect while I sat beside her offering encouragement. Where had those children gone? When did they become these strangers who only called when they needed something? The table itself was another relic of a different life. Thomas and I had bought it at a yard sale when we first moved to Brooklyn 35 years ago. It was scratched and wobbly, but we had loved it. We refinished it together, spending a weekend in the small backyard, sanding and staining the wood. The children had done their homework at this table. We had played board games here on rainy Sundays. Thomas had held my hand across this surface the night my mother died, telling me everything would be okay. Now I sat here alone, the wood grain familiar beneath my fingertips, and wondered when I had stopped mattering to the people I loved most. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. "Did you see my email?" "I need an answer today, Mom." I felt my chest tighten. The pressure built behind my eyes, but I refused to cry. I had cried enough tears over the years to fill the East River. Instead, I picked up the phone and typed a response that would change everything. I wrote simply, "I need time to think about this." His reply came within seconds. "What is there to think about? You either help your son, or you do not." That sentence sat on my screen like a knife. You either help your son, or you do not. As though 30 years of sacrifices meant nothing. As though the college tuition I had paid from my retirement savings was insignificant. As though the down payment I had given him for his first apartment was already forgotten. As though the $20,000 I had sent him last year to cover his gambling debts had evaporated from his memory. I set the phone down and for the first time allowed myself to wonder if my children had ever truly seen me at all. I thought about Thomas in that moment. What would he have said if he were here? Would he have told me to give Ethan the money to keep the peace? Or would he have been as appalled as I was by our son's entitlement? Thomas had been a gentle man, a high school English teacher who believed in the goodness of people. But he also believed in responsibility and consequences, in the importance of standing up for yourself. I wish I could have talked to him. I wish I could have asked his advice. But he had been gone for 5 years now, and I had to figure this out on my own. The rest of that day passed in a fog. I went through my routine mechanically. I watered the plants on the windowsill. I sorted through old mail. I made myself lunch that I barely touched. But beneath the surface, my mind was racing. I thought about the stock portfolio Thomas had left me when he died 5 years ago. He had been meticulous about our finances, always planning for the future. The investments he made in tech companies and index funds had grown substantially over the years. There was also the small inheritance from my mother and the sale of our summer house in the Hamptons. Combined with our savings and a modest Bitcoin investment Thomas had made as a curiosity, back in 2012, I had accumulated just over $2 million. It was meant to be my security, my safety net for the uncertain years ahead. Thomas had sat me down 6 months before his heart attack and walked me through every account, every investment, every detail of our financial life. "Eleanor," he had said, his hand covering mine, "I need you to promise me something. If anything happens to me, I want you to be smart about this money. Do not give it all away to the kids. They are adults now. They need to learn to take care of themselves. You take care of yourself first. Promise me." I had promised, though at the time I thought it was unnecessary. I thought our children would never take advantage of me. How naive I had been. Ethan knew about this money. I had mentioned it to him last Christmas when he asked about my financial situation. I thought we were having a genuine conversation about my future, about whether I might need to move to a smaller place or if I was comfortable. Instead, he had been gathering intelligence, calculating how much he could extract from me. The realization made me feel sick. I walked to the bedroom and opened the closet where I kept a shoebox filled with old letters and cards. I pulled out a birthday card Jessica had given me 3 years ago. On the front was a picture of a mother and daughter holding hands. Inside, she had written, "Love you, Mom, thanks for everything you do." I had cherished this card, kept it in the box with my most precious memories. But now I noticed what was missing. There was no personal message, no specific memory, no real acknowledgement of who I was beyond the role I played. It was a greeting card filled with greeting card sentiments. Generic. Hollow. I found another card from Ethan from 5 years ago. "Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you have a great day." That was it. 13 words. I had raised him for 18 years, and he could only spare 13 words. I placed the cards back in the box and closed the closet door. The late afternoon light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I sat on the edge of my bed and allowed myself to feel the full weight of my loneliness. The bedroom had once been a sanctuary. Thomas and I had painted the walls together a soft sage green that reminded us of the countryside. We had saved up for months to buy the oak bed frame that now dominated the room. On his side of the bed, his reading lamp still sat on the nightstand, though it had not been turned on in 5 years. Sometimes I would reach over in the night, forgetting for a moment that he was gone. My hand would find only empty space, and the reality would crash over me again. But even in my grief over Thomas, I had never felt as alone as I did right now. At least he had loved me. At least he had seen me. That evening I did something I had not done in months. I called my friend Margaret, whom I had known since our children were in elementary school together. We had drifted apart over the years as she moved to New Jersey, and I stayed in Brooklyn, but hearing her voice brought an unexpected comfort. "Eleanor," she said warmly. "What a lovely surprise." We talked for nearly an hour about everything and nothing. She told me about her grandchildren, about her garden, about a trip she was planning to visit her sister in California. When I finally mentioned Ethan's demand, there was a long pause. "Eleanor," she said carefully, "you know I love you. But I have to ask you something. When was the last time either of your children did something for you without wanting something in return?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. Margaret continued gently, "I am not trying to hurt you. But from where I am standing, it looks like they have been taking advantage of your kindness for years. You have given them everything, and what have they given you?" I sat in silence, unable to deny the truth in her words. Margaret told me about her own daughter, who had gone through a similar phase. She would call constantly asking for money for help for favors. Margaret had finally put her foot down, refused to keep enabling her. "It was the hardest thing I ever did," she said. "For 6 months, we barely spoke. But eventually, she figured things out. She got a better job. She learned to budget. She grew up. And now our relationship is better than it has ever been because it is based on mutual respect, not just on what I can provide. I do not know if that is what will happen with your kids, Eleanor. But I do know that you deserve better than being treated like a bank." After we hung up, I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling the foundations of my world beginning to crack. Margaret's words echoed in my mind. What have they given you? I tried to think of anything that my children had done for me in recent years that was not transactional. I came up empty. Even the Christmas gifts they gave me felt obligatory. Generic candles or scarves still in their original packaging as though they had been purchased at the last minute without thought. I had tried so hard to give them a better childhood than I had. I had tried to be present and supportive and generous. But somewhere along the way, generosity had become expectation, and love had become obligation. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay in bed replaying memories like old film reels. I remembered the year Ethan turned 16 and wanted a car. I worked overtime at the hospital where I was a nurse, taking extra shifts to save enough money. When I finally gave him the keys on his birthday, he barely looked at me. He was too busy texting his friends about his new car. I remembered Jessica's wedding 4 years ago. I had paid for almost everything: the venue, the flowers, the photographer. She had been stressed for months leading up to the big day, and I had absorbed all her anxiety trying to make everything perfect. At the reception, she thanked everyone in her speech, her husband, her friends, her colleagues. She mentioned me in passing, thanks to my parents for their support. That was all. Thanks for their support. As though I were a foundation, rather than a person. I remembered the dress I had worn to that wedding. I had wanted to wear something elegant, something that would make me feel beautiful. But when I showed Jessica the dress, I had chosen a deep burgundy with delicate beading. She had frowned. "Mom," she said, "that color is really bold. Are you sure you want to stand out that much? I do not want the photos to look weird." I had returned the dress and bought something beige instead. Something that would blend into the background. Something that would not take attention away from the bride. I had felt invisible all day and told myself that was how it was supposed to be. It was her day, not mine. But now I wondered why my daughter could not have wanted me to feel beautiful too. I thought about my own mother who had passed away 10 years ago. She had been a difficult woman, critical and distant. I had promised myself I would be different with my own children. I would be warm and generous and present. I would give them everything I had never received. But somewhere along the way, my generosity had become expected. My love had become obligation, and I had allowed it to happen. My mother had rarely told me she loved me. She had rarely hugged me or praised me or made me feel valued. I had grown up hungry for affection, and I had vowed that my children would never feel that way. But in my desperation to be different from her, I had swung too far in the other direction. I had given without boundaries. I had loved without requiring respect. And now I was paying the price. My children did not value me because I had never taught them that I had value. I had been so afraid of being like my mother that I had become something else equally damaging, a doormat. The next morning, I woke with a strange clarity. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and pen. I began writing a list of every significant financial contribution I had made to my children over the past decade. The numbers were staggering. Between the two of them, I had given over $400,000, college tuition, car payments, rent deposits, credit card debts, emergency loans that were never repaid, business ventures that failed, legal fees from Ethan's DUI. The list went on and on. I stared at the numbers, feeling a mixture of shock and recognition. This was not love. This was exploitation. As I wrote, I remembered specific moments. The time Jessica called crying because she had maxed out her credit cards and could not make the minimum payment. I had sent her $5,000 immediately. 2 months later, I saw photos on her social media of a vacation she had taken to Mexico. New bikinis, expensive restaurants, cocktails on the beach. When I gently asked about it, she had been defensive. "I needed a break, Mom. You do not understand how stressful my life is." The irony of that statement was not lost on me now. I had been working 60-hour weeks as a nurse at the time, dealing with my own stress, but somehow my stress did not count. I picked up my phone and looked at Ethan's messages again. "Did you see my email? I need an answer today, Mom. You either help your son or you do not." I felt something shift inside me. A door closing, a line being drawn. I typed a response that took me 3 tries to get right. "Ethan, I have thought carefully about your request. My answer is no. I will not be giving you $1 million. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. His response came immediately. "Are you serious?" I could feel the anger through the screen. I wrote back, "Yes, I am serious." He called me within seconds. I let it ring. He called again. I silenced my phone. Over the next hour, he sent a barrage of messages. "You are being ridiculous. I am your son. I need this money, Mom. This is important. How can you do this to me? After everything I have done for you." That last message almost made me laugh. After everything he had done for me. What exactly had he done for me? I could not think of a single thing. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my silent phone and felt something I had not felt in years. Power. Not the cruel, manipulative power that my children wielded over me, but a quiet, steady power that came from standing up for myself. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was firm. I was done being used. I was done sacrificing myself for people who did not appreciate it. I was done. Jessica called later that afternoon. "Mom, what is going on? Ethan is really upset. He says you refuse to help him." I took a deep breath. "That is correct. I am not giving him $1 million. But Mom," she said, her voice taking on that wheedling tone I knew so well, "he really needs it. This could change his life." I felt a spark of anger. "And what about my life, Jessica? What about my needs?" She was quiet for a moment. "What do you need, Mom? You are fine. You have your apartment and your savings." Ethan is struggling. The assumption in her voice was maddening. That I was fine. That my needs were met simply because I had a roof over my head and money in the bank. As though emotional fulfillment did not matter. As though companionship and respect and appreciation were luxuries I no longer required at my age. I closed my eyes, trying to contain my frustration. "Jessica," I said slowly, "when was the last time you called me just to talk? Not to ask for money or help, but just to see how I was doing." There was a long pause. "I call you," she said defensively. "Yes," I said. "You call when you need something. But when was the last time you called because you wanted to hear my voice?" Another pause. "I do not know," she admitted quietly. "Exactly," I said. "And that is the problem." I closed my eyes. The assumption that I was fine, that my life was settled and required nothing more, was so deeply ingrained in both my children that they could not even conceive of my having needs of my own. I told Jessica I had to go and ended the call. I sat in my living room as the afternoon light faded, listening to the sounds of the city outside my window. For the first time in years, I felt something other than resignation. I felt the faint stirring of self-respect. That week, I made an appointment with a financial advisor, someone Margaret had recommended. His office was in Midtown, in one of those glass towers that made you feel small. He was a kind man in his 50s with graying hair and a gentle manner. His name was David Chen, and his office was lined with family photos. I noticed that in every picture he was centered, surrounded by smiling faces. I wondered what that felt like, to be the center of your own family's world. I explained my situation and showed him the list I had made. He listened without judgment, his expression growing more serious as I talked. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said when I finished, "I work with many clients in your position. Parents who have spent their lives providing for their children and now find themselves being taken advantage of. The first thing I want you to understand is that you have every right to protect your assets. This is your money. You earned it. You deserve to keep it." His words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. No one had told me I deserved anything in so long. Everyone in my life had been so focused on what I should give, on what I owed, on my obligations as a mother. But David was the first person in years to remind me that I had rights too. We spent the next hour going over my finances. He helped me understand exactly what I had and what my options were. He suggested setting up a trust that would protect my assets and ensure I had enough for my own future. He also recommended I speak with an attorney about drafting a will that clearly outlined my wishes. As I left his office, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that I was finally taking control. Sadness that it had come to this. Walking out of that building into the bustling streets of Manhattan, I felt like a different person. People rushed past me on their way to meetings, to lunch, to lives that had nothing to do with mine. I stood on the corner watching the light change and realized that I had spent so much of my life living for other people that I had forgotten how to live for myself. But that was about to change. Over the following days, the messages from my children intensified. Ethan's grew increasingly hostile. "You are being selfish. You are a terrible mother. I cannot believe you would do this to me." Jessica's were more manipulative. "Mom, please reconsider. Think about the family. We need to stick together. What would Dad say?" That last one stung. What would Thomas say? I thought about my husband, about the man who had worked so hard to provide for us. I thought about the conversations we used to have late at night about our hopes for our children. We wanted them to be independent and successful and kind. We wanted them to have good lives, but we never intended for them to become entitled and demanding and cruel. I remembered one night in particular about a year before Thomas died. We had been lying in bed and I had mentioned that Ethan had asked for money again. Thomas had sighed. "Eleanor," he said, "we need to stop giving him everything he asks for. We are not helping him. We are hurting him. He needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. I had agreed in principle, but when Ethan called the next week desperate and pleading, I had sent the money anyway. Thomas had been disappointed, but he had not pushed the issue. Now I wished he had. I wished he had forced me to be stronger sooner. I realized that somewhere along the way I had confused love with enabling. I had thought that giving them everything they wanted was the same as supporting them. But real support would have meant teaching them to be self-sufficient. Real love would have meant setting boundaries. I had failed them by never saying no, and now I was paying the price. One evening as I was preparing dinner, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Ethan standing in the hallway. He looked disheveled, his hair unkempt, his eyes bloodshot. "Mom, we need to talk." I stepped aside and let him in. He paced my living room, his agitation filling the small space. "You do not understand," he said. "I am in trouble. Real trouble. I owe people money. Dangerous people. If I do not pay them back, I do not know what will happen." I felt a chill run through me. "Ethan, what have you done?" He looked at me, and for a moment I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "I made some bad investments, Mom. I thought I could turn things around, but it just kept getting worse. I borrowed money from the wrong people. They are threatening me." I sat down on the couch, my legs suddenly weak. "How much do you owe?" He hesitated. 200,000. Maybe more. I felt the room spin. "And you thought asking me for $1 million would solve this?" He nodded desperately. "I could pay them back and have enough left over to start fresh. Maybe invest in something solid. Turn my life around." I looked at my son and saw clearly for the first time what he had become. A middle-aged man who had never learned to take responsibility for his actions. A man who believed his mother would always rescue him. A man who had no concept of consequences. "Ethan," I said quietly, "I am not going to give you the money." His face flushed with anger. "Are you kidding me right now? I just told you I am in danger and you are going to let me suffer." I shook my head. "I am not letting you suffer. I am letting you face the consequences of your choices. Those are 2 different things." He stared at me in disbelief. "I cannot believe this. What kind of mother are you?" The question hung in the air between us. What kind of mother was I? For so long, I had defined myself by my willingness to sacrifice everything for my children. But that version of motherhood had created children who had no respect for me or for themselves. Maybe being a good mother meant something different than I had thought. Maybe it meant loving them enough to let them struggle. Maybe it meant respecting myself enough to set boundaries. I looked at Ethan standing in my living room, this man I had brought into the world and raised and loved with every fiber of my being. And I saw that my enabling had done him no favors. Every time I had rescued him, I had taught him that he did not need to rescue himself. Every time I had paid his debts, I had taught him that debts did not matter. Every time I had said yes, when I should have said no, I had weakened him a little more. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I love you. I always will. But I am not going to give you this money. You need to figure this out yourself." He stared at me, his mouth open in shock. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Ethan left my apartment that night, slamming the door behind him. I sat alone in the silence that followed, feeling the weight of what I had done. Part of me wanted to call him back, to fix everything the way I always had. But a stronger part of me knew that this time I had to stand firm. I had to choose myself. I walked to the window and watched as Ethan emerged onto the street below. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment looking up at my building. Even from the third floor, I could see the anger in his posture, the tension in his shoulders. Then he pulled out his phone and started pacing, talking animatedly to someone I could not see. After a few minutes, he got into a cab and disappeared into the night. I let the curtain fall back into place and stood in the darkness of my living room, wondering if I had just lost my son forever. The next day, I received a phone call from Jessica. She was crying. "Mom, how could you turn Ethan away? He came to me last night and he was a mess. He told me about his debts and his problems. You have to help him." I took a deep breath. "Jessica, I love you and I love your brother, but I am not going to enable his self-destructive behavior anymore. He is a grown man and he needs to figure this out himself." "But Mom," she protested, "he is family. We are supposed to help each other." I felt a surge of frustration. "Jessica, when was the last time you or your brother helped me with anything? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you visited without wanting something?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "That is not fair," she finally said. "We have our own lives. We are busy." I nodded even though she could not see me. "I know you are busy, and I am glad you have full lives, but that does not mean you get to treat me like a bank account that exists solely for your convenience." Jessica tried to argue, tried to make me see reason as she put it. But I stood firm. Finally, she said something that cut deeper than any of Ethan's angry words. "You know what, Mom?" she said, her voice cold. "Maybe Ethan is right. Maybe you have changed. The mom I knew would never have been this selfish." And then she hung up on me. She hung up on me. I sat holding the phone, feeling the familiar ache of rejection. But beneath the ache was something new, a small, hard kernel of resolve. I was done apologizing for having boundaries. I was done feeling guilty for saying no. I was done sacrificing my own well-being for children who had long since stopped caring about mine. The word selfish echoed in my mind for days. Was I being selfish? I had given my children everything for decades. I had worked overtime to pay for their education. I had gone without so they could have. I had put their needs above my own time and time again. And now that I had finally said no to one request, I was selfish. The logic was absurd, but it still hurt. It hurt because it came from my daughter. It hurt because I had spent my whole life trying to be anything but selfish. It hurt because part of me still believed she might be right. That afternoon, I went for a walk through Prospect Park. The trees were beginning to turn their leaves, shifting from green to gold and crimson. Families picnicked on the grass. Dogs chased frisbees. Couples walked hand in hand. I watched it all and felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, I was not consumed by worry about my children. I was not mentally calculating how much money I could spare or what problem I needed to solve. I was simply present in the moment. It was both terrifying and liberating. I found a bench near the lake and sat watching the ducks glide across the water. An elderly man was feeding them breadcrumbs despite the sign that said not to. He caught me watching and smiled. I know, he said, gesturing at the sign. But these ducks have been coming to me for 5 years. They expect it now." I smiled back. We got to talking, and I learned his name was Arthur. His wife had passed away 2 years ago, and he came to the park every day because it was where they used to walk together. "We are creatures of habit," he said. "We build our lives around the people we love, and when they are gone, we do not know what to do with ourselves. But I am learning that there is freedom in loss. I can feed the ducks even though Helen always scolded me for it. I can eat ice cream for breakfast. I can do whatever I want because there is no one left to disappoint." He looked at me closely. "You look like someone who is learning that lesson too." I found myself telling him about Ethan and Jessica, about the money and the demands and my decision to finally say no. Arthur listened, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said my daughter did not speak to me for 3 years because I would not co-sign a loan for her. 3 years. But when she finally came back to me, she was different, stronger, more independent. She thanked me for saying no. She said it was the push she needed to get her life together. I do not know if that is what will happen with your kids, but I do know that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for the people we love is let them fall. His words stayed with me as I walked home. Let them fall. It went against every instinct I had as a mother. My job had always been to catch them, to protect them, to keep them safe. But maybe Arthur was right. Maybe I had been catching them for so long that they had never learned to catch themselves. I thought about what I wanted for the rest of my life. I was 72 years old. If I was lucky, I might have another 15 or 20 years ahead of me. Did I want to spend them being manipulated and taken advantage of? Or did I want to spend them living for myself? The answer was suddenly very clear. Over the next few weeks, I began to rebuild my life. I joined a book club at the local library. I started taking yoga classes at a studio near my apartment. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with because I was always too busy dealing with my children's crises. I discovered that I had interests and passions beyond my role as a mother. I rediscovered parts of myself I had forgotten existed. The book club met every Tuesday evening in a small room at the library. There were 8 of us, all women ranging in age from 50 to 80. We read everything from literary fiction to mysteries to memoirs. But more than the books, I loved the conversation. These women were smart and funny and opinionated. They had lives and careers and stories, and they treated me like a person, not like a mother or a wallet, but like Eleanor. It was intoxicating. One evening after book club, a woman named Patricia invited me for coffee. We went to a small cafe around the corner and talked for 2 hours. She told me about her career as a lawyer, about her decision not to have children, about her marriage to a man who respected her ambition. I found myself envying her clarity. She had always known what she wanted, and she had never apologized for it. I wish I had been more like you, I told her. She shook her head. You did what you thought was right at the time. We all do. The important thing is that you are making different choices now. The yoga classes were harder than I expected. My body was stiff from years of sitting and worrying. But the instructor, a young woman named Mira, was patient. She showed me modifications and encouraged me to listen to my body. Slowly, I started to feel stronger, more flexible, more alive. There was something meditative about the practice, about focusing on breath and movement and letting everything else fall away. For an hour, 3 times a week, I did not think about Ethan or Jessica or money or regret. I just breathed and moved and existed. I also made concrete changes to protect myself. I met with an attorney and updated my will. I set up a trust that would ensure my assets were distributed according to my wishes and not subject to manipulation. I changed my phone number and gave the new one only to people I trusted. I established firm boundaries with my children. I would no longer be available to solve their problems or fund their mistakes. The attorney I worked with was a woman named Rebecca Morrison. She specialized in elder law and had seen countless cases like mine. Mrs. Hartwell, she said as we reviewed my documents, I want you to understand something. What your children are doing has a name. It is called financial elder abuse, and it is more common than people think. You are making the right choice by protecting yourself. She helped me draft a will that was ironclad. She set up a trust that would provide for me for the rest of my life, and then distribute the remainder to charities I cared about. My children would receive a small amount each, but nothing close to what they expected. Rebecca also gave me advice on how to protect myself emotionally. Set boundaries, she said. Stick to them. And do not feel guilty for putting yourself first. Ethan and Jessica were furious. They tried every tactic they could think of to change my mind. Anger, guilt, pleading, silence. Nothing worked. I had spent too many years bending to their will. I was not going back. There were moments when my resolve wavered. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet, I would sometimes think about calling them, about reaching out and trying to mend things. But then I would remember the way they had treated me. The casual disrespect, the constant demands, the complete lack of appreciation. And I would remind myself that I deserved better. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 weeks after my initial refusal, I was at the farmer's market in Brooklyn when I ran into my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. She was a widow in her 80s, sharp and kind, with a no-nonsense attitude I had always admired. "Eleanor," she said when she saw me, "you look different." I laughed. "Different good or different bad?" "Different good," she said firmly. "You look lighter somehow, like a weight has been lifted." We got coffee at a nearby cafe, and I found myself telling her everything about Ethan's demand, about my decision to say no, about the fallout with my children. She listened carefully, her eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Eleanor," she said, "you did the right thing. I know it does not feel like it right now, but you did. Your children need to learn that you are a person, not just a resource, and you need to learn that you are worth more than what you can provide." Mrs. Thompson told me her own story. She had 3 children, all successful, all living across the country. For years, they had visited only when they needed something. Money for a down payment on a house, help with childcare, a place to stay during a work trip. She had given and given until one day she realized she was exhausted. So she stopped. She told them she was no longer available as a free hotel or bank or babysitter. The response was predictable: anger, guilt trips, accusations of being a bad mother. But she held firm. And eventually her children adjusted. They started visiting because they wanted to see her, not because they needed something. Their relationships improved because they were finally based on mutual respect. It took time, she said, and it was painful. But it was worth it. Now when my kids call, I am happy to hear from them because I know they actually want to talk to me. Not to my wallet, not to my services. To me. She squeezed my hand. "You will get there too, Eleanor. Be patient with yourself. And do not back down." Her words brought tears to my eyes. It was the first time anyone had explicitly validated my decision. My children certainly had not. My extended family had been mostly silent, some of them clearly disapproving of my choice to withhold money from my own flesh and blood. But Mrs. Thompson understood. She had lived long enough to see the patterns that repeated across generations. She knew the cost of sacrificing yourself for people who did not appreciate it. As spring turned into summer, I continued to focus on my own life. I took a painting class and discovered I had a talent for watercolors. I started volunteering at a community garden, helping to grow vegetables for local food banks. I went to concerts and museums and plays. I did all the things I had always wanted to do, but never had time for because I was too busy managing my children's chaos. The painting class was taught by a retired art teacher named Gloria. She was in her 70s with wild gray hair and paint-stained fingers. She encouraged us to experiment, to make mistakes, to find our own style. I started with simple landscapes, trying to capture the parks and streets of Brooklyn. But over time, I grew bolder. I painted abstract pieces full of color and emotion. I painted my feelings, the anger and sadness and liberation I was experiencing. Gloria loved them. "You are not afraid anymore," she said, looking at one of my pieces. "I can see it in your brushstrokes. You are free." The community garden became another refuge. It was a small plot of land tucked between 2 buildings run entirely by volunteers. I signed up to help on Saturday mornings and found myself looking forward to it all week. There was something deeply satisfying about working with the soil, about planting seeds and watching them grow. The other volunteers were a diverse group: college students and retirees, immigrants and native New Yorkers. We worked side by side, weeding and watering and harvesting. And we talked about our lives, our families, our dreams. I felt connected to these people in a way I had not felt connected to anyone in years. Then one afternoon in early July, something unexpected happened. I was at home reading when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jessica standing there. She looked different somehow. softer, less certain. "Mom," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to shut the door to protect myself from further hurt, but another part of me was curious. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the living room, the same room where I had refused Ethan's demand all those months ago. Jessica twisted her hands in her lap, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom, I owe you an apology. I have been thinking a lot about everything that has happened, about the way I have treated you, and I am ashamed." I waited, not trusting myself to speak. She continued, her voice breaking. "I took you for granted. We both did. Ethan and me. We treated you like you existed only to serve us. We never asked what you needed or how you were doing. We just took and expected you to keep giving." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I did not let them fall. Jessica looked up at me, her own eyes wet. "I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not even know if I deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what we did to you, and I am sorry." I took a deep breath. "Jessica, I appreciate you saying that. I really do. But I need you to understand something. I am not the same person I was 6 months ago. I am not going to go back to the way things were." She nodded. "I know. I am not asking you to. I just want to try to have a relationship with you. A real one. Where I actually care about your life and not just what you can do for me." I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of manipulation, but all I saw was genuine remorse. "Okay," I said slowly. "We can try. But it is going to take time, and it is going to require real change from you, not just words." She nodded again. "I understand." We talked for another hour about everything and nothing. It was the first real conversation we had had in years. When she left, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. Not the desperate hope I used to cling to that my children would magically transform into the people I wanted them to be, but a quieter, more realistic hope that perhaps with time and effort, we could build something new. Jessica told me about her life in a way she never had before. She talked about her struggles at work, about feeling undervalued and overlooked. She talked about her marriage, about the ways she and her husband had grown apart. She talked about her fears about her children growing up in a world that felt increasingly uncertain. And for the first time, I felt like I was talking to a real person, not just my daughter. She had depth and complexity and pain. She was human. And in her humanity, I found the possibility of connection. Ethan was a different story. He did not apologize. He did not reach out. According to Jessica, he had eventually gotten a loan from a different source and paid off his debts. He was working as a consultant for a tech startup and seemed to be keeping his head above water. But he had made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with me. I had betrayed him in his eyes by refusing to bail him out. And he could not forgive that. It hurt. Of course it hurt. He was my son, and despite everything, I still loved him. But I also understood that I could not force him to see things differently. All I could do was live my life and hope that someday he would come to his own realization. And if he did not, well, I had learned that I could survive that too. As the summer stretched into fall, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The confrontation with Ethan, the financial changes I had made, the slow, careful rebuilding of my relationship with Jessica, the new friendships I had formed, the hobbies I had discovered. It had been the hardest year of my life, but it had also been in some ways the most rewarding. I thought about the version of myself from a year ago, the woman who had spent decades defining herself solely through her children. The woman who had believed that love meant giving everything and expecting nothing in return. The woman who had allowed herself to be used because she was terrified of being alone. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who understood that self-respect was not selfish. Someone who knew that boundaries were not betrayals. Someone who had learned that you could love your children deeply while still choosing yourself. One October afternoon, I was sitting on a bench in the park watching the leaves fall when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Hartwell," a woman's voice said. "This is Sarah Chen from the New York Times. I am working on an article about financial elder abuse, and I was wondering if you might be willing to share your story." I was taken aback. "How did you get my number? Your financial advisor gave it to me with your permission. He said you might be interested in raising awareness about this issue." I hesitated. The idea of sharing my personal story with the world was terrifying. But then I thought about all the other parents out there who might be going through the same thing. All the mothers and fathers who were being exploited by their own children and did not know how to break free. Maybe my story could help them. I agreed to the interview. A week later, Sarah came to my apartment with a photographer. We talked for hours. I told her everything. About the years of sacrifice. About Ethan's demand for $1 million. About the painful process of setting boundaries. About the backlash from my children. About the slow rebuilding of my life. When the article was published a month later, the response was overwhelming. Sarah was younger than I expected, probably in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She asked thoughtful questions and really listened to my answers. She did not judge or interrupt. She just let me tell my story. The photographer was an older man named Marcus who had a quiet, respectful presence. He took pictures of me in my apartment, sitting at the kitchen table where I had fed my children, standing by the window looking out at the city, holding the chipped sugar bowl that Thomas had given me. I felt vulnerable having my life documented this way, but I also felt a strange sense of pride. This was my story, and I was choosing to tell it. I received hundreds of emails from people thanking me for speaking out. Many of them were in similar situations, feeling trapped between their love for their children and their own need for security and respect. Some had adult children who drained their retirement accounts. Others had grandchildren they supported because their own kids could not or would not. Still others faced emotional manipulation that left them feeling guilty for wanting anything for themselves. Reading their stories, I realized how common this problem was, and I felt grateful that I had found the courage to speak up. One email in particular stayed with me. It was from a woman named Linda who lived in Ohio. She wrote, "Mrs. Hartwell, I am 68 years old and I have been supporting my son for 30 years. He is 50 now and he has never held a job for more than 6 months. I pay his rent, I buy his groceries, I give him spending money, and he treats me like garbage. He yells at me if the money is late. He blames me for all his problems. I know I should stop, but I am terrified that if I do, he will end up homeless. Your article gave me the courage to finally set a boundary. I told him I would pay his rent for 3 more months, and then he is on his own. He is furious, but I feel lighter than I have in years. Thank you for showing me that it is possible to say no." I wrote back to Linda and we started corresponding regularly. She became a friend, someone who understood what I was going through because she was going through it too. We supported each other through the hard moments when the guilt threatened to overwhelm us. We celebrated the small victories, and we reminded each other that we deserved to have lives of our own. But not everyone was supportive. Some people criticized me for airing my family's dirty laundry in public. Others accused me of being a bad mother for refusing to help my son when he was in trouble. There were think pieces written about parental responsibility and what we owe our children. The backlash stung, but it also reinforced why boundaries were necessary. Even strangers felt entitled to my money and my choices. If I could not say no to them, how could I expect to say no to my own children? One particularly harsh comment came from a woman on social media who wrote, "Your son came to you in his time of need, and you turned him away. What kind of mother does that? I hope you can live with yourself." I read the comment and felt the familiar guilt rising in my chest. But then I reminded myself of the truth. Ethan had not come to me in his time of need. He had come to me with his hand out, expecting me to fix a mess he had created. There was a difference, and I was done letting other people define what kind of mother I should be. Through it all, Jessica stood by me. She called regularly just to check in. She invited me to dinner with her family. She started including me in her life in real, meaningful ways. It was not perfect. We still had moments of tension where old patterns threatened to resurface. But we were both committed to doing better. And that commitment made all the difference. One Sunday, Jessica invited me to her house for brunch. It was just the two of us. Her husband had taken the kids to a soccer game. We sat in her sunny kitchen drinking coffee and eating croissants. She asked me about my painting class, about the community garden, about Robert, a man I had recently started seeing. She listened to my answers, really listened, not just waiting for her turn to talk. And then she said something that made me cry. "Mom, I am proud of you. You are braver than I ever gave you credit for." I reached across the table and held her hand, feeling a connection I had not felt in years. As winter approached and the city prepared for the holidays, I found myself in a place I never expected to be. Content. Not happy in the naive, uncomplicated way I had once hoped for, but content in a deeper, more authentic way. I had learned that I could survive rejection. I had learned that I could choose myself without being selfish. I had learned that love without respect was not really love at all. On Christmas Eve, Jessica came over with her husband and kids. We made dinner together, decorating cookies and listening to music. Ethan's absence was noticeable, but I did not let it ruin the evening. I had spent too many years letting my children's choices determine my happiness. This year I was choosing to be happy regardless. As I watched my grandchildren play, I felt a bittersweetness for what might have been mixed with gratitude for what was. This was not the family I had imagined, but it was the family I had. And for the first time, that was enough. The grandchildren were 8 and 5. The older one, Emma, was shy and serious. The younger one, Lucas, was all energy and chaos. I watched them decorate cookies with more icing than actual cookie, and felt a surge of love. I wanted to be in their lives in a way that was healthy. I wanted to show them that it was okay to have boundaries, that you could love people and still say no. I wanted to be a different kind of grandmother than I had been a mother. In the new year, I decided to write a book about my experience. Not a memoir exactly, but more of a guide for other parents who were struggling with similar issues. How to recognize financial abuse, how to set boundaries, how to rebuild your self-worth after years of being diminished, how to love your children while still loving yourself. I spent months working on it, pouring all my pain and hard-won wisdom into the pages. Writing the book was cathartic. Every morning I would sit at my kitchen table with my laptop and write. Some days the words flowed easily. Other days I struggled to find the right language to capture what I had been through. But I kept at it. I wrote about the shame I had felt, the guilt, the fear. I wrote about the moment I finally said no and how terrifying and exhilarating it had been. I wrote about the slow process of rebuilding my life, and I wrote about the hope I now had that things could be different. When it was finally published, the response was even bigger than the article had been. I was invited to speak at libraries and community centers. I appeared on podcasts and local news programs. I connected with organizations that helped older adults protect themselves from exploitation. My life took on a new purpose. I was no longer just Eleanor Hartwell, the woman whose children had taken advantage of her. I was Eleanor Hartwell, the advocate, the survivor, the voice for people who had been silenced. Through all of this, I continued to build my own life. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see. I took classes in subjects that interested me. I made new friends and deepened old friendships. I discovered that life after 70 could be rich and fulfilling in ways I had never imagined. I no longer woke up each morning with a sense of dread, wondering what crisis I would have to manage. Instead, I woke up with possibility. I took a trip to Italy, something I had always dreamed of, but never allowed myself. I spent 2 weeks wandering through Rome and Florence and Venice. I ate pasta and drank wine, and stood in awe in front of art I had only seen in books. I traveled alone, which terrified me at first, but turned out to be one of the most liberating experiences of my life. I did not have to compromise or coordinate. I could go where I wanted when I wanted. I could be completely myself. There were still hard days, days when I missed Ethan so much it physically hurt, days when I wondered if I had made the right choice, days when the loneliness felt overwhelming. But even on those days, I knew I would not go back. I had tasted freedom, and I could not unknow what it felt like to live for myself. One spring morning, almost 2 years after I had first refused Ethan's demand, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop reading when someone tapped me on the shoulder. I looked up to see a young woman probably in her 30s with tears in her eyes. "Are you Eleanor Hartwell?" she asked. I nodded. She sat down across from me without asking. "I just finished your book," she said. "And I want to thank you. My mother has been supporting my brother for years, even though he treats her terribly. I have been trying to get her to see that she deserves better, but she would not listen." I gave her your book and something finally clicked. She is setting boundaries now. She is taking her life back, and it is all because of you. I felt tears spring to my own eyes. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Tell your mother she said the same thing to you, that she is not alone, that there is life on the other side of this, that she is worth fighting for." The woman nodded, squeezing my hand. "I will. Thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to share your story." After she left, I sat alone with my coffee, watching the people pass by outside the window. I thought about the journey I had been on, the pain and the growth, the losses and the gains, the old self I had shed and the new self I had become. It had not been easy. There had been moments when I wanted to give up, when the pull of old patterns was almost too strong to resist. But I had persisted. And in doing so, I had discovered something profound. I had discovered that I was enough, not as a mother or a provider or a caretaker, but as myself. Just Eleanor. Just me. The relationship with Jessica continued to deepen. She had started therapy to work through her own issues around entitlement and boundaries. We had honest conversations about the past conversations that were sometimes painful, but always necessary. She told me about her memories of her childhood, the ways she felt I had been both too present and not present enough. I listened without defensiveness, acknowledging the ways I had fallen short, while also standing firm in the knowledge that I had done my best with what I knew at the time. She also started to understand the sacrifices I had made in ways she never had before. When her own children got older and she saw how expensive it was to raise them, she began to grasp what it must have cost me to put her and Ethan through college. When her daughter asked for money for the 5th time in a month, she understood the exhaustion of being treated like an ATM. Our shared experiences as mothers created a new bridge between us. We were no longer just parent and child. We were two women navigating the complex terrain of family and boundaries and self-worth. Ethan remained distant. Through Jessica, I learned fragments of his life. He had gotten married to a woman named Rachel. They had a baby on the way. Part of me ached to be included in these milestones, but I understood that I could not force reconciliation. All I could do was leave the door open and hope that someday he would walk through it. In the meantime, I focused on the relationships I did have, the people who showed up for me, the people who saw my worth. I also invested in myself in new ways. I took a pottery class and discovered a love for working with clay. There was something deeply satisfying about shaping something beautiful with my hands. I joined a writing group where I shared essays about aging and independence and finding yourself in the second half of life. I started dating a kind man named Robert, whom I met at the community garden. We took things slowly, both of us scarred by past relationships, but hopeful about what we might build together. Robert was 75, a retired engineer with gentle hands and a quick wit. He had lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago and was still learning how to live alone. We bonded over our shared grief and our shared determination to build lives that mattered. Our first date was a walk through the park. Our second was dinner at a small Italian restaurant. By our third date, we were finishing each other's sentences. He made me laugh, something I had not done enough of in recent years. And he made me feel seen in a way I had not felt since Thomas died. My life had become unrecognizable from what it had been 3 years ago. Back then, I had been trapped in a cycle of giving and receiving nothing in return. Now I was surrounded by reciprocal relationships. People who cared about me for who I was, not what I could provide. People who showed up when I needed them. People who celebrated my successes and supported me through my struggles. It was what I had always wanted from my children, but had never received. And finding it elsewhere had been a revelation. As I approached my 75th birthday, I decided to do something I had never done before. I threw myself a party. Not a small, quiet affair, but a real celebration with decorations and music and a catered meal. I invited all the people who had become important to me over the past few years. My book club friends, my yoga classmates, my writing group, Robert, Mrs. Thompson, Margaret, who traveled in from New Jersey, and Jessica with her family. I did not invite Ethan, though I left space for him in my heart, hoping that someday he might find his way back. The party was magical. People laughed and danced and toasted to my health. I wore a dress I had bought specifically for the occasion, bold and colorful, and completely unlike anything I had worn in decades. When it came time to blow out the candles on my cake, I looked around the room at all these people who loved me, and I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what it meant to be valued. This was what it meant to be seen. In my speech, I thanked everyone for coming. I talked about the journey I had been on, the ways I had lost myself and then found myself again. I talked about the importance of boundaries and self-respect. I talked about the courage it takes to choose yourself, especially when the people you love make it hard. And I talked about hope. About how it is never too late to start over. About how transformation is always possible if you are willing to do the work. As the evening wound down and people started to leave, Jessica pulled me aside. "Mom," she said, "I am so proud of you." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw genuine love in her eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "That means everything to me." We hugged, and in that moment I felt something I had not felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of acceptance. This was my life. Messy and complicated and beautiful. And I was finally okay with that. The weeks and months that followed were filled with the ordinary rhythms of daily life. I continued my hobbies and friendships. I worked on a second book, this one focusing on rebuilding your identity after major life changes. I spent time with Jessica and her kids. Robert and I took a trip to the coast where we walked on the beach and talked about our dreams for the future. Life was not perfect, but it was mine, and that made it precious. One afternoon in late autumn, almost 3 years after I had first said no to Ethan, I received a letter in the mail. The return address was unfamiliar, but something about the handwriting made my heart skip. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single page covered in Ethan's familiar scrawl. "Mom," it began, "I do not know if you will even read this. I would not blame you if you threw it away. But I need to try. I have been thinking a lot about what happened. About the way I treated you, about the things I said and did, and I am ashamed. You were right to say no to me. I was not asking for help, I was demanding it as though you owed me something, as though your entire existence was meant to serve my needs. I took you for granted for years. I see that now. I did not see you as a person. I saw you as a resource. And that was wrong. I am writing to apologize. Not because I want anything from you, not because I expect forgiveness, but because you deserve to know that I finally understand what I did. I hurt you, Mom, deeply and repeatedly, and I am sorry. I do not know if we will ever have a relationship again. I do not know if you even want that, but I wanted you to know that I am trying to be better. I am in therapy. I am working on myself. I am trying to become the kind of person you deserve to have as a son. I hope you are well. I hope you have found peace. You deserve it. Love, Ethan." I sat holding the letter for a long time, tears streaming down my face. It was not everything. It did not undo the years of pain. But it was something. An acknowledgement. A beginning. Whether it would lead to reconciliation, I did not know. But the fact that he had written it at all meant that perhaps there was still hope. I did not respond to the letter right away. I needed time to process my feelings to decide what I wanted. Part of me wanted to rush to reconcile, to believe that his apology meant everything was fixed. But I had learned the hard way that change takes time. Words were easy. Actions were what mattered. So I waited. I sat with the letter and with my own complicated emotions. And slowly I began to formulate a response. When I finally wrote back several weeks later, my message was simple. Ethan, thank you for your letter. I appreciate your apology, and I am glad you are working on yourself. I am not ready to resume a full relationship yet. I need to see consistent change over time, not just words, but actions. But I am not closing the door either. I am leaving it open a crack. When and if you are ready, we can take small steps toward rebuilding trust. I hope you understand. I am protecting myself, not punishing you. I wish you well. Mom. I sent the letter and tried not to obsess over what his response would be. Life continued. Winter came and went. Spring blossomed again. And slowly, cautiously, Ethan and I began to communicate. Short emails at first, then occasional phone calls. He told me about his life, about his wife and his daughter. I told him about mine, about the book and the community garden and Robert. We did not talk about the past much. We were both too fragile for that. But we were talking. And that was something. I do not know where things will go with Ethan. Maybe we will fully reconcile. Maybe we will remain distant but cordial. Maybe something will happen that will push us apart again. I have learned not to predict the future or to pin all my hopes on one outcome. All I can do is live in the present, set my boundaries, protect my peace, and see what unfolds. As I sit here now, looking back on the past few years, I am struck by how much has changed. The woman who first received that email demanding $1 million barely exists anymore. She has been replaced by someone stronger, someone who knows her worth. I have learned that saying no is not cruel, that choosing yourself is not selfish, that love without respect is hollow. I have learned that transformation is possible at any age, that it is never too late to reclaim your life, that you can lose everything and still find yourself. My story is not a fairy tale. There is no neat resolution where everyone learns their lesson and we all live happily ever after. But it is real, and it is mine, and I am proud of it. I am proud of the choice I made to stand up for myself. I am proud of the life I have built. I am proud of the woman I have become. Have you ever lived or known someone who lived something like this? Have you found yourself giving and giving until there was nothing left? Have you struggled to set boundaries with the people you love? If my story resonates with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. Together we can create a space where stories like mine are heard and where healing is possible. Because you deserve to be valued. You deserve to be respected. You deserve to choose yourself. And it is never too late to start.